Okay, so here is the specification database. I'm going to run through a quick demo of it. To open it, you have to have Microsoft Access. I did this database in 2016, but you can also use 2013. When you open it, it will come up to this switchboard. This is where the specifications are found, where you can enter in the information. Here's some handy filters. We also have the item master and the certs and statements. We'll be going through that. Here's where you manage your tests and your methods. And then here's some categorical forms that the rest of these tables use. So let's start at the very basic. Let's start with the item master. When we open this up, I've already loaded it with some information. So here's a whole bunch of materials. You can see that we have 294 in this database. You can also see that you can filter it. So let's say I wanted to look up everything with the item number 1000. Or I can do anything with an L dash, and I have 17 records. You can also see that it will filter out by components. So if we wanted to do FP, there's the L-isoleucine. If we want to insert a new record, we simply enter in a new item number, which must be unique. If it's not unique, the system won't allow you to enter it in. So we're going to call this unique item, and it's going to be a component. We're going to make it active, and its form will be powder bulk. Oh, let's see, because apparently there's already a 9000 in there, so let's up it to 9001. There we go. So this is the item master. So anytime you use an item number, it's going to get pulled from this table. Let's close that. Here are these certs and statements, which is basically a list of the certifications that you want your material or your finished product to have. Again, all these forms are set up with a filter at the top, so you can filter out things as the list starts to grow. Over here we have the tests and methods. And so the way this database is set up is we will enter in a method over here. It can be any name that you want. Simply drop down here, and we're going to call this a new method. Let's close this. And then over on these two are the tests that use the method. So you can see that we have an analytical specification combined with the test name and a method. This will make more sense once we get into the specifications themselves. But this is setting up the tests that we will be using. You can see that I have about 185 tests in here. Let's enter in a new test. So we want to do a new physical test, and we want our test name to be new test, and the method that we're going to use is the new method. Okay, so I just set up for the physical category a new test with a new method. And if you wanted to go in and wanted to change the B3 niacinamide to the new method, you could simply do that. Now, any specification which uses this test will have the new method applied to it. So let's close this. And then the second group that we have are microtests. And I assign these on a categorical basis, meaning that we create micro categories so that any item which is a botanical extract, oil, or syrup will have these specific tests and limits. Again, this will make more sense once we jump into the component. So let's go here to the component specification. There's quite a few that I've dropped in as examples. You can easily move up and down. They're sorted by the item number and by the version. So you'll notice that this L-leucine at 1000, it has two versions. The purpose of this is when you create one version and then you want to rev up, you don't have to overwrite the previous version. You can simply keep scaling up and keep those versions in the database so that you can compare against them. So let's do something simple. We're going to search, actually we're going to create a new specification, and we're going to create, we're going to use the 9000 item number. Actually, let's use the 9001. So you can see that this is a component specification. These items that are in here are only components. So you can't accidentally assign a finished product item number to a component specification. The version drops in automatically as number 1. The date will autofill to today's date, but we can change that to any day that we want. There are a few fields on here that are not changeable. So these are hooked up to the item master. So if you want to change this information, you have to come back in to the item master and change it in here. We're going to assign it a microcategory. Let's call it the botanical extract. So it's a component with this microcategory. So let's assign some tests. Remember the new test that we assigned in the physical category. And then the specification, we're just going to type in a random number, and we're going to say it has that many milligrams. Then let's give it a bulk density, where we have 1.00 grams per ml. Let's drop down to the analytical section. We're going to test for ascorbic acid. In this specification, it's going to be 50 milligrams. And we're going to test for beta carotene. Let's do that. And here we have 75 IUs. Again, we go in and set up the test with the method, and then basically we assign this to each unique item. And as we go in and need to make changes, any unique item which uses the test and method will be changed. The micro, you can see that it's set up by categories. And so remember up here we said component and the botanical extract oil syrup. So CMP. So we simply assign these different limits. The test, the method, and the specification are already set for us. We can go in and let's assign the contaminants, and we're going to say this is less than 1000 ppm. And any special requirements that we may have. Let's say we purchase this component from a specific vendor, and I want grade FCC 80. Or we want to do a specific item number from that vendor, and their item number is 1879 or 18759. We can drop down and excuse me, add in whatever certifications we want. So let's say we want a non-GMO and organic. And then lastly, we enter in who made these changes. The version change is 0 because that's the default. If the previous version up here were, say, a 2, 3, or 4, then you would note which version you changed here. The date recorded, again, defaults to today's date, and we're going to add what we did, what we changed. New item creation. We can drop down because I wanted to. Okay, and now we come back up and we can scroll over, and there's our item. If we want to go ahead and we'll drop in the 9001 number that we just worked on, we'll click that we want it to print up the change history. We hit the print button, and here's the 9001 item number, the unique item, along with the version, its item category is a component, and the correct micro category and the form that we used. You can see the test along with the method and the acceptance criteria, and we broke it into the different subcategories of the specification. I typically like to limit the physical tests to things that can be done on the benchtop in a wet chemistry or stoichiometry way. The analytical I reserve for things that require an instrument to measure, such as an HPLC or a GCMS. Micro, self-explanatory. Contaminants I like to break out because these are typically looked at by the FDA as well as customers. Special requirements, again, self-explanatory along with the required certifications and statements, and then the approval at the bottom. We can change up these different departments depending on what you need. So if you want it to say a VP of manufacturing and the VP of quality and the chief operating officer, we can change that to whatever you want and make that work. So that's a component specification. And again, as we go in and change things up in the database, it will reflect those changes in the specification. So let's take a look. Oh, 1 minute. This is the change history that we chose to print up. We click the change history box there. This will print the version of the specification, but it will be a running tally of all of the changes that you've made. So if you've changed versions 1, 2, 3, 4, they will all show up here with their changes. Again, it makes a nice repository for that information. Let's close that, and we changed 9001. So let's come in here and we're going to play with the micro, and we're going to do a component. And remember, this total aerobic plate count had this value, so let's take that to 50,000. Right? So we come in, let's go to the spec, print it up, and it's reflected in the database. So any item that used the total aerobic plate count, this method, and was assigned to the botanical extract oil syrup category will now have these new limits applied to them. Because the database is designed this way, you don't have standalone documents anymore. So you don't have, say, an individual Word file for everything. You're able to manage information on a much broader scale. So if we come into one of our filters and we look at our specification filter, so these are all the raw materials, all of the finished products. This is everything that has a specification. So if I wanted to look up everything with L-tryptophan in it, I have two tests. applied to this item number, and here are my limits. If we wanted to do something bigger, let's look up all of our analytical tests. So I can now see that we have 221 analytical tests assigned, and if we wanted to further refine that and look at everything with USP in it, there's 103 tests. So we get to, again, look at all of this information across a very large scale. So we have everything with a microtest. And so we can look at these individual item numbers and say, well, this L-valine and this L-tryptophan, do they need to have the same numbers here? Or should we look at creating a new class? If we did, then what item numbers would be impacted? Again, it just gives you this ability to look broadly at everything as opposed to standalone unique documents. So that takes care of components. Let's take a look at work in process. And the way I designed this database is that components roll up to WIP, which then rolls up to finished product. In your case, this means these components, which are individual raw materials, will come up and be consumed in the work in process. And there's a place in there where we can add in the composition. And then these work in process will be consumed by the finished products. So let's click on the work in process, and here are some that I've dropped in from a previous company. You can see that the test here that we assigned in the other component, I simply dropped it in here. You can see that it already has the new limits assigned to it. Let's see, let's change that to the correct micro category. And on this one, we did loss on drying. I dropped in boron and calcium. Let's drop in alpha lipoic, and we'll do that at 5,000 milligrams. Now the real difference, the only addition between the components in the work in process is going to be the addition of this little table here entitled composition. This is where we assign different raw materials and their different amounts. I have this right now as amount per 1 kilo. We can change that to be a percentage. We can change it to be a specific unit of measure. So I can unhide the unit of measure over here, and it will look like this. So we can have the unit of measure where we can choose a blank, each, grams. M is for meters for measuring things like film. And then we have milligrams. So we can drop in here the different raw materials that are used. You can enter in, we have 50. And then we have the change history. Now, what this does, we can open up our specification. It says work in process. Here's the item number, the description, the version. And here's all the tests along with the new composition that we added. This enables us to track what goes into it, and it enables the operators to look at their pick list and understand what should be in the product. Essentially what we're doing is we're saying the specification that we establish is what should be used when comparing the pick list and the MMR. So those pick lists and the MMR should match what is on the specification. And if we go to the second page, we can see the approvals. The finished products are set up the same way as the WIP. So right now I only have one item that is set up as a finished product. If we wanted to add more, we simply come in here and let's choose the valine and the tryptophan. So now when we open up finished products, the valine and the tryptophan show up because they are categorized as finished products. Again, the concept of rolling up from a component to a whip to a finished product. So we can come down again with the composition. This time I added the unit of measure because you're generally going to have a whip item, which is in, say, bulk capsules or bulk product. And let's say we add 500 grams of product, and I don't have any bottles set up. Let's go set up a bottle. So let's say we're going to add in a bottle, and we're going to, actually let's get this 9002, and this is a bottle, and it's a component active, and I don't think I have it form set up, but you get the point. And then let's do a label. It's also a component. Okay. So now when we come in here, isoleucine, let's say we have the whip level, so we're going to consume that, and now we can add in our bottle, and those are typically going to be one each, as well as our label, which is one each. And the theory is that this item will have a whip spec, and this item will have a component spec. Again, we're consuming all of these to roll up into our finished product spec. Hit the print button, type in 1001, and here is our finished product specification. Again, with the header information, the testing information that we entered, as well as the composition. So now you know exactly what is being used to create this item number. And again, the concept is that these things roll up into your finished product spec. We can close this, and as you can see, this database is designed to take care of your components, your work in process, and your finished product specs. The remaining tables are primarily for support. They have the things like the categories. So on this one, item categories, you can see this is where I have things like component and finished product. If we wanted to change that, we could come into the item master now and notice that everything with the CMP is now the word component. Let's change that back though. I like it a little bit better short. And now we close this and everything's back to CMP. Here are the micro categories, so you can drop in new micro categories. You're not confined just to the groups that I've created. I personally like to use the NSF guidelines or the USP guidelines, whichever you're comfortable with. The material status, it's a pretty easy one. Things are generally going to be active or retired. Sometimes I'll drop in a working category here if I want to have some interim form, but usually just active and retired is sufficient. The recorder is who actually made the changes, so these people are the ones who get used on the change control down here at the bottom. So these are the people that get used for that. Let's close that form, close that one. And then the last one is the item form. So again, you can change these to whichever forms you want. I just dropped in a few of the common ones, but perhaps you have different ones that are specific to your company. This database is designed to manage these three specifications, as well as the composition that is associated with these two. You can print the specifications. You can also look at the information in a broad perspective and understand which tests you're applying to which groups of products, as well as how that product should interact and work with each other. And that is pretty much the database. It's designed to take all of these pieces of information and bring them together in a single specification and enable you to manage the data. So again, I'm Andy Swenson, and if you have any questions, please contact me. The email address is andyswenson, ANDYSWENSON @gmail.com. Thanks for your time, and have a great night.